In the beginning, there was a question that echoed through the corridors of forgotten temples and whispered in the dreams of seekers across millennia. A question so profound, so dangerous, that it was buried beneath layers of doctrine, rewritten in sacred texts, and hidden behind the veil of religious interpretation. That question was simple, yet it held the power to transform everything we believed about the figure at the center of Western spirituality. What if Christ's true symbol was not the cross, but the serpent? Listen carefully, because what you are about to hear challenges centuries of theological consensus. It invites you to reconsider not just the history of Christianity, but the very nature of divine wisdom and spiritual transformation itself. The story begins not in Bethlehem, but in the desert. Not in the year zero, but in the timeless space where myth and history converge. It begins with a man, or perhaps a symbol of a man, who understood something that the institutional church would spend 2,000 years trying to suppress. There was a seeker once, a scholar of ancient mysteries, who spent his life in the libraries of forgotten cities and the archives of secret orders. His name is not important. What matters is his journey. What matters is what he discovered when he finally allowed himself to ask the questions that terrified him. He had spent decades studying the early Christian texts, not the canonical Gospels that sit in every church, but the apocryphal writings, the Gnostic documents, the letters that were deemed heretical and burned. And in those texts, he found something that made his hands tremble. He found references, cryptic and veiled, to the serpent as a symbol of liberation, of knowledge, of divine truth. How is this possible? He whispered to himself one night, surrounded by ancient manuscripts illuminated by candlelight. How could the very symbol that Christianity taught us to fear, the serpent of Eden, the tempter, the devil himself, be connected to Christ? The answer, he would discover, lay in understanding the language of symbols. It lay in recognizing that the same image, when viewed through different eyes and different eras, could be transformed into its opposite. What was wisdom to the initiated became deception to the masses. What was liberation to the enlightened became sin to the controlled. This seeker began to trace a thread through history, a golden thread that connected ancient Egypt, the mystery schools of Greece, the Gnostic communities of the early Christian era, and the hidden teachings of Christ himself. And as he followed this thread, a portrait emerged. A portrait so different from the one hanging in every cathedral that it seemed almost impossible. But the evidence was there, waiting in the margins of history, in the spaces between what was said and what was hidden. To understand this mystery, we must first travel backward, far backward, to the ancient world where symbols were not mere decorations, but vessels of profound knowledge. In ancient Egypt, the serpent was sacred. The uraeus, the cobra that crowned the pharaohs, was not a symbol of evil but of divine power, of the kundalini force that rises through the spine, awakening consciousness itself. The serpent was Wadjet, the protector goddess. The serpent was the symbol of transformation, of shedding the old skin to reveal the new. In the mystery schools of Greece, particularly at Eleusis, initiates underwent secret rituals in which they encountered the serpent as a symbol of rebirth and gnosis, true knowledge. The serpent was associated with Asclepius, the god of healing and medicine, whose staff bore the intertwined serpents that we still see in medical symbols today. This was not coincidence. This was intentional. The serpent represented the healing power of truth, the medicine of wisdom. And then, in the Gnostic traditions that emerged in the early centuries of Christianity, there was an even more radical claim. The Gnostics spoke of the Ophites, the serpent worshippers, who saw in the serpent a liberating force. They spoke of Sophia, the divine feminine wisdom, who manifested as the serpent in the Garden of Eden. And they claimed that this serpent, this bringer of knowledge, was not the enemy of God, but an emanation of divine wisdom itself. The text called the Apocryphon of John contains a striking passage. In it, The serpent is described as the voice of Sophia, sent to awaken humanity to the truth of their divine nature. And the spirit-endowed race will receive complete salvation in every way. The text declares, the serpent was the messenger, the awakener, the one who offered humanity the fruit of knowledge, not to damn them, but to free them. This was dangerous knowledge. This was the kind of knowledge that threatened the emerging institutional church, which sought to consolidate power by keeping the masses in spiritual darkness, dependent on priests and bishops for access to divine truth. Our seeker, following this thread, found himself drawn to the desert monasteries of Egypt, where the earliest Christian ascetics had preserved fragments of teachings that did not make it into the official canon. In a hidden chamber beneath one of these monasteries, he discovered something that would change everything. It was a manuscript written in Coptic, dating back to the 4th century. The text was fragmentary, damaged by time, but what remained was extraordinary. It contained what appeared to be a dialogue between a master and a student, discussing the true meaning of Christ's encounter with the serpent in the wilderness. The master's voice emerged from the ancient page. When the Christ went into the desert for 40 days and nights, he did not go to be tempted by evil. He went to commune with the serpent wisdom that dwells in the depths of consciousness. The serpent is not the enemy of God. The serpent is the messenger of transformation. It is the force that moves through all creation, that which the ancients called the Kundalini, the sacred fire. The student asks, "But Master, does not the gospel tell us that Satan in the form of a serpent tempted our Lord?" And the master replies, "The gospel speaks in layers, my child. To those with ears to hear, yes. To those bound by literal interpretation, the serpent remains the devil. But to those who have tasted the fruit of knowledge, who have undergone the initiations, the serpent reveals itself as the very instrument of divine transformation." Christ did not resist the serpent in the desert. Christ embraced it. Christ became one with it. These words struck the seeker like lightning. He read them again and again, his heart racing. Could it be true? Could the entire narrative of Christianity have been inverted, twisted by those who feared the liberating power of true gnosis? He pressed deeper into the manuscript, his fingers trembling as he turned each fragile page. The master continued, speaking with a clarity that seemed to pierce through the centuries. "Remember the words of the Christ himself, spoken to his disciples in the presence of the serpent. He said, 'Be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves.'" This was no accident of language. This was direct instruction. The serpent represents wisdom, the ability to see through illusion, to shed the old self and be reborn into truth. The dove represents innocence, the purity of intention. Together, they form the path of the initiate. The seeker sat back, overwhelmed. He had spent his entire life studying Christianity, and yet he had never truly understood this passage. He had read it 100 times, perhaps 1,000, and it had never struck him with such force. Be wise as serpents, not beware of serpents, not reject the serpent, but be wise as serpents. Christ was not condemning the serpent. Christ was instructing his followers to embody the serpent's wisdom. He continued reading, and the manuscript revealed more. It spoke of the symbol that Christ truly carried, the symbol that was hidden from the masses but known to the initiates. It was not the cross, or rather, it was the cross, but understood in a completely different way. The cross, according to this ancient text, represented the intersection of the vertical and horizontal planes, the meeting of heaven and earth, spirit and matter. And at the center of this cross, at the point where all lines converge, was the serpent. The serpent was the axis mundi, the central pillar around which all creation revolved. "The cross without the serpent is incomplete," the master's voice declared. "It is a symbol of division, of separation between the divine and the human, but the cross with the serpent at its heart is the symbol of wholeness, of the reconciliation of all opposites. This is what the true initiates understood. This is what was taught in the mystery schools, and this is what Christ came to reveal to those with eyes to see. The seeker felt as though the ground beneath him was shifting. Everything he had believed, everything he had been taught, was being questioned. And yet, the more he read, the more sense it made, the more he understood that he was not looking at heresy, but at the deepest truth of Christianity itself, hidden beneath layers of institutional distortion. He thought of the serpent in the Garden of Eden, the serpent that offered Eve the fruit of knowledge. In the official narrative, this was the fall of man, the moment of disobedience that brought sin into the world. But what if it was the opposite? What if it was the moment of awakening? What if the serpent was not the tempter but the liberator, offering humanity the knowledge that would free them from ignorance and servitude? The Gnostic texts spoke of this explicitly. They spoke of the demiurge, the false god who created the material world and demanded obedience and worship. And they spoke of Sophia, divine wisdom, who sent the serpent to awaken humanity to the truth of their divine nature, to show them that they were not slaves to the demiurge, but sparks of the true God. The serpent was the revolutionary, the one who challenged authority, the one who offered forbidden knowledge. And Christ, according to this understanding, was the ultimate serpent initiate. He was the one who came to challenge the false authorities of his time, the priests, the scribes, the Pharisees, who kept the people in spiritual darkness. He was the one who offered the knowledge of the kingdom of heaven, not as a distant reward in the afterlife, but as a present reality, available to those who could perceive it. The kingdom of heaven is within you, he said. This was the serpent's wisdom. This was the knowledge that liberation comes not from external authority, but from inner awakening. The seeker's mind raced through the implications. If this was true, then the entire history of Christianity had been a betrayal of Christ's true teachings. The institutional church, with its hierarchies and its claims to exclusive access to divine truth, was the very thing Christ had come to oppose. The church had taken the revolutionary symbol of the serpent and transformed it into the devil. It had taken the liberating knowledge of gnosis and replaced it with blind faith and obedience. It had taken the inner kingdom and externalized it, making it dependent on priests and sacraments and institutional mediation. And yet, the seeker also understood something else. He understood that this was not a simple story of good versus evil, of enlightenment versus ignorance. The institutional church had also preserved something valuable. It had kept alive the memory of Christ, even if distorted. It had maintained communities of faith, even if based on misunderstanding. It had offered comfort and meaning to millions, even if built on a foundation of hidden truth. The question that haunted him now was this: what should he do with what he had discovered? Should he reveal it to the world? Should he challenge the foundations of Christianity itself? Or should he, like the ancient masters, keep this knowledge hidden, available only to those who were ready to receive it? If you want a practical, step-by-step explanation of the path of knowledge we're exploring here today, I've created a complete guide to help you apply it in your own life. You'll find the link in the description, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to know. The seeker spent many nights in contemplation, wrestling with this decision. He thought of the words of Christ, who had said, "Do not cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn to attack you." This was the eternal dilemma of the keeper of esoteric knowledge. How much could be revealed? How much must remain hidden? To whom could the truth be entrusted? He decided finally that the truth could not remain hidden forever. The world was changing. The old certainties were crumbling. People were beginning to ask questions, to seek answers beyond what the institutions offered. The time had come to plant seeds, to offer hints and clues, to create the conditions for others to discover what he had discovered. And so he began to write. Not a direct exposition, but a series of meditations, of symbolic narratives, of questions posed to the reader. He wrote about the serpent in the desert, about the initiate's journey, about the hidden wisdom that lay beneath the surface of the Christian tradition. He wrote in a way that would speak to those who were ready to hear, while remaining cryptic enough to protect the knowledge from those who would misuse it. Years passed. The seeker grew old, his hair turning white, his body weakening. But his mind remained sharp, focused on his great work. He knew that he would not live to see the full flowering of what he had begun. But he also knew that the seeds he was planting would grow, that others would pick up the thread he had started, that the truth would eventually emerge into the light. On his deathbed, surrounded by a small circle of trusted students, he spoke his final words. "The serpent is not evil," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The serpent is the symbol of transformation, of the death of the old self and the birth of the new." Christ understood this. Christ embodied this. And those who truly follow Christ must also embrace the serpent, must allow themselves to be transformed, must shed their old skins and be reborn into truth. This is the gospel that was hidden. This is the symbol that was suppressed, but it cannot remain hidden forever. The serpent will rise again. The truth will be revealed. And those who have ears to hear will understand. And with those words, he closed his eyes for the last time, but his work lived on. His writings circulated among seekers and students. His questions began to germinate in the minds of those who read them. And slowly, gradually, the hidden gospel of the serpent began to emerge from the shadows. In our own time, we see the evidence of this resurgence all around us. The symbol of the serpent appears again and again in the spiritual movements of our age, the Kundalini awakening, the chakra system, the understanding of the body as a vessel of divine energy. All of these are expressions of the serpent wisdom that Christ understood and taught. The liberation theology movements, which emphasize Christ's solidarity with the oppressed and his challenge to unjust authority, are expressions of the serpent's revolutionary wisdom. The mystical Christianity that is emerging in our time, which emphasizes direct experience of the divine rather than institutional mediation, is a return to the true gospel of the serpent. And yet, the old institutions still resist. They still teach that the serpent is evil, that knowledge is dangerous, that obedience to authority is the path to salvation. They still fear the liberating power of gnosis. They still seek to control and manipulate, to keep people dependent on their mediation of divine truth. But the serpent cannot be suppressed forever. It is the force of transformation itself, the power that drives evolution and awakening. It is present in every moment of genuine spiritual growth, in every shedding of illusion, in every birth of new consciousness. And those who truly follow Christ, who truly understand his teachings, must embrace this serpent wisdom. They must allow themselves to be transformed. They must shed their old skins. They must be reborn. The gospel of the serpent is not a gospel of sin and damnation. It is a gospel of liberation and awakening. It is the good news that humanity is not trapped in ignorance and servitude, but is capable of transformation, of enlightenment, of becoming one with the divine. It is the message that the kingdom of heaven is not a distant reward, but a present reality available to those who have the wisdom to perceive it and the courage to live it. This is the symbol that Christ truly followed. This is the wisdom that he came to teach. And this is the knowledge that in our own time is rising again, calling us to awaken, to transform, to become wise as serpents and harmless as doves. The serpent is rising, the truth is emerging, and those who have ears to hear will understand. And if you like this story, you will definitely love the next one that's appearing on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and activate the notifications. See you in the next one.